Okay, this is going to be an interesting one, and it's going to upset some of you. But like I said, I've been posting about schools reopening, and we need to start having this discussion because I think a lot of parents, and this is a great question, and I appreciate you asking it, because many parents are going to face this issue. And depending on the state you live in, it's going to be wildly different because the states themselves are responsible under the health order. Now, why is that? I mean, I know that everybody in this country, they're somehow looking at Washington, D.C., they're looking at Trump, and they're saying, oh, the federal government and their coronavirus response. Guys, this is a state health issue, first and foremost. Why? Because it has police powers. The federal government doesn't have police powers. The state government has police powers. Under our separations of power, that's what we want. We don't want the federal government to have police powers. I don't like the power that they do have currently in the form of their intelligence apparatus and a lot of that stuff I don't agree with. I don't think they should have that amount of power. That's why the states have police power. So under the police power, that's where the health emergency orders would come in and the power of the state government in order to handle that. Federal government's there to assist with resources and support, but not to sit there and control the situation. So there's not going to be uniformity. Number one is the virus isn't acting uniformly either. There's pockets of this country that are impacted far more than other parts of this country. And so to sit there and treat New York City, for example, the same way as Colorado or Arizona is just, it doesn't make any sense. Different situation, okay? So there's parts of this country, quite frankly, that can reopen and can reopen safely. It's just not the same. So you need to sit there and look at population concentrations. You need to look at all of those factors. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach. And a lot of this fear is unfounded, but that's what you get when you have a collision of a bunch of different factors. But let's get to your question. Your son is going into third grade, has ASD. He has an IEP that states, and you have a second question, but I'm going to mesh them both together. And your IEP you did in May, okay, so in May of 2020, where it calls for a one-to-one educational aide. If you choose to keep him home and do distant learning option through the school district, is he still entitled to have an aide since it's in his IEP? School principal told my son's current aide that if he does not come into the school building for instruction, then he will not have an aide. And this is where, let's go ahead and work through this, okay? You already have an IEP in place. That IEP was developed for the 2021 school year. So the IEP was developed to provide your child a free and appropriate public education. That is the responsibility of your public school. They have 100% of the legal duty to provide your child a FAPE. Okay? So there is not, you have zero responsibility. Your responsibility on the IEP team is a huge one, but it's really lopsided with regards to responsibilities. The school system has all the responsibility. Your responsibility is that you're a decision maker. You're 50% of that team and that decision-making process, and then you provide consent for them to move forward. Okay, so it is lopsided with regards to that relationship. So the conundrum that we're in is that it's going to be different than the spring, where it was equitable. All the schools were closed, therefore impacting all students. Now in the fall, it's not going to be like that for many states. And so we're trying to figure out how this is going to be determined. So what do we have to rely upon in order to make that decision? Because we're charting into unknown territory just like we were in the spring. Okay, there's no rules for what we're going through right now. So But with regards to the schools reopening, we do have things within existing law to pull from with regards to a proper analysis. And we're going to have to pull from that. The State Department of Education in your state put out general guidelines. General guidelines. Now, how they're going to be applied within your particular school system is going to depend on a couple factors. Number one, did your county or did your city, if you're in a city school, did your county or did your city have stricter policies than the governor put in place with regards to, let's say, mask wearing? And in your particular state, you're in Alabama, there isn't a mask mandate per se, not like it exists in other parts of the country, to where it's very specific and quite stricter. So at that point, there's been many counties, or there's been a few counties and a few cities that have actually created stricter mask wearing policies. Okay, that's allowed, which means that the school systems, State Department of Education provided their guidance on safe COVID reopening practices. And then at that point, the local school district will need to sit there and create their own policies and make sure that they're aligned with the state health order. Okay, and then also their local health department if enhancements were made outside of what the governor did. Okay, so they can make enhancements. They can't do less than what the governor ordered. When it comes to health, that's the beauty of our separation of powers, guys. I mean, you know, all politics is local and should be. All right, it should be closest to you because these are the people that have the most impact over your life. Are your local politicians. Okay, so starting there, that's where you do that. That's where you got to do that initial analysis. Now, since schools will reopen in your area, and they aren't going to enhance the governor's orders at that point. They're going to have their own policies, but they got to at least follow the COVID safe practices for reopening that the State Department of Education put out, which is in conjunction with the state health order, which may expire before school starts, by the way, unless the governor renews it. I think it's up sometime in July. Okay, so that's another thing that you need to think about. Since your school district has the 100% duty to provide your child with free and appropriate public education, then at that point, they're going to develop the IEP in a manner that would be able to achieve that. And since schools are open, it needs to be a determination of what FAPE would look like in a traditional school environment. That's where the one-to-one aide comes in. The school system or the IEP team says, when he's here, he needs a one-to-one aide. Now, at that point, because of COVID, many of the states are allowing flexible options that include a hybrid mix of in-school and virtual learning, full virtual learning, and then also full attendance during the day. Now, it's also going to be up to the school system whether they want to do sort of a hybrid mix, unless it's specified in the policy that that's allowed. That would be sort of an IEP team decision. But your IEP team already made the decision in May that this is what FAPE looks like for him, which includes a one-to-one aide. Okay, so if a parent makes a different determination, if the parent, for whatever reason, says, I feel more comfortable continuing with distant learning, okay, you're going to be allowed that flexibility, but understand that now would be an obstacle, a legal obstacle to your school system fulfilling their legal mandate to provide your child with a free and appropriate public education. There will be an allowance for you to be able to do the virtual option, but at the same time, if your school system was smart, they would put it in a prior written notice that the IEP was developed for a traditional school year. This is what we believe needs to happen to provide him a FAPE. That would be the prior written notice statement. And then the follow-up statement is that the parent it feels more comfortable continuing with distant learning, and therefore the parents, we're going to honor the parent's request for distant learning. What that would do is it would sort of dilute your ability to challenge if your child wasn't making measurable progress. I mean, it basically weaken any kind of argument that you would have if you filed a due process complaint, because the school system, which you were a member of that team in May, the school system says this is what we need to provide him a FAPE. You're exercising an option for virtual learning. Therefore, they cannot fulfill what they believe they need to do in order to have him receive a free and appropriate public education. So you do have your option, but at the same time, what that means is that the school system, if they're smart, is going to put a prior written notice in there to protect themselves from a legal challenge by the parent that your son wasn't making measurable progress. So would that include the aide? No, the aide would not go with you on virtual learning. The aide is a function of the traditional school environment, and you wouldn't be entitled to that aide in the way that the IEP is currently set up. So if you choose the virtual option, then they're going to have to go back and amend the IEP. But if I was a school system, that's what I would do. I would make sure that the prior written notice was locked down, that this is what FAPE is, and that they're honoring the parent option, which they're going to give parents in many, many states that right. Alabama is one of those, to continue with that option. There's some variance in my viewpoint, but it would depend on a whole bunch of different factors. Number one is, do you have a medical reason? Is the doctor recommending due to whatever? So I'm just giving you the general basis, but could there be other factors that the parent could put in there in order to make the prior written notice language a little bit different, to where FAPE is the virtual option because of the medical recommendations? Potentially, yes, but it would depend on what the justifications behind that, whether those justifications are valid with regards to the virus, whatever factor. So, let's say you have a high-risk child. Well, you would need to have the medical documentation to back that up, and then, of course, it would need to fall in line with what the current medical science says with regards to transmission, X, Y, and Z. Okay. I wanted to add that because what I said was going to be more based upon parent choice, not necessarily based upon any kind of health condition, of high-risk health condition. That would be an exception, but there would be some factors that you would need to put into place in order for that to be recognized. But with regards to the aide, regardless, even if you had a medical recommendation, you wouldn't be entitled to the aide, and especially the aide inside your home, because the school district isn't under any obligation to send an aide into your home, especially if you are stating that you're not comfortable sending your child around other people. Then that's another justification that the school would use, that if you want an aide in your home, then the child can come to school. We're still working this out. I had a long talk with a couple of attorneys, one of which was a board attorney, and I was picking her brain because I want to know what they're telling their clients to make sure that we're in line. And a lot of this stuff hasn't been figured out yet, guys. So we're just pulling from existing law, our existing knowledge, And we're trying to figure this out because the feds aren't going to come out with a policy. The waivers aren't going to happen. So FAPE is still going to have to be provided. Now, how we do that and how we balance that, I'm just telling you what the legal recommendations will likely be given by board attorneys to their client, and that is to lock down the IEP. This is what FAPE is inside the school environment, and then if the parent chooses a different option, then putting that in the prior written notice with the express purpose of protecting the school district from a legal challenge that FAPE was not provided. Because the how they would be defending themselves is saying that we respected the parent option. We told them that we couldn't provide a FAPE in distant learning, and that FAPE can be provided inside the school environment. I know it's not going to make a lot of you happy, but that's, whether you like it or not, it's a governmental institution, and the governmental institution, just like a corporation, is going to put things in place to legally protect itself.